All right, so Raul, this is where we left off. Can you tell me why we care about these Ulster volunteers, Irish volunteers? Like, why do we spend some time on these guys?
I cannot because I did not get to watching the video.
Oh, well, that's terrible. All right, how about you, Mike?
Uh, well, I guess at least for probably for both of them, it is these volunteer groups are sort of the joining of these other groups like Sinn Féin and Hibernians, and I don't know exactly what that means, but in terms of the strength,
I'm getting the impression, Mike, that you did not watch the video.
I did watch the video, but besides besides like what's on the screen, I didn't really get much.
Okay. All right. Yash, help me out.
It kind of signified the shift into armed protest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing here, right? That the creation of these two groups, the Ulster Volunteers and the Irish Volunteers, signifies that the Irish are taking sides and that they're taking up arms. Okay. This is where they're recruiting at sporting events. This is where they're trying to get these armed groups. These will become the armies. These will become the armies because we're going to start a war here in just a moment. Okay. All right. I don't think we did anything with World War I. Is that correct? That's correct. Okay. All right. So let's go to the next number, the next big number, which should be like M, I think, something like that. M or N. All right. So World War I. World War I. So right off the bat, Ilha, what your instincts about World War I? What do you expect World War I to do to the Irish independence movement?
Probably like further divide each side because there's like more support gathered for like
Okay.
Ireland, and
Okay.
since like there's a war, like Great Britain would like be like occupied with the war so that the independence movement might like be more advanced. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's where we're going in here. I think Ilha, your instinct is correct on both accounts. That the Irish are going to become more divided, but I think more importantly is B, the Irish are going to take this opportunity to rebel. Right? We saw that happen in South Africa. We saw that happen in India. Like we know what's going to happen here, right? So when the war starts off, Ireland is the only part of the entire empire that is not drafted. It's the only part of the empire that's not drafted, and that's because of the negotiation with Redmond and the Liberal Party, but it's also because Ireland is kind of viewed as being kind of a pain in the butt, right? That Ireland is kind of like a powder keg waiting to explode. It's this kind of pain in the butt, and they think that Ireland might just be a problem. Okay. Now, this is a calculation the British are not going to make about India or South Africa, right? Because in both cases, they draft them and it gets worse, right? But in the case of Ireland, they don't immediately draft them. Ireland does produce a lot of volunteers, though. Okay. It sends 200,000 volunteers to the war. And John Redmond here, he's going to support the war effort. Okay. He basically makes the argument that you don't need to draft us because we're going to volunteer. So Raul, who is Redmond? Who is this guy?
I don't know.
Okay. How about you, Mike? Who's Redmond?
I remember he led some of the land league and the land laws.
Not quite. Not quite. John Redmond right here, the election of 1910. He's the leader of the IPP, the leader of the Irish Parliamentary Party. Okay. Now, you guys are acting like you have not read any of the articles yet, and in some cases not even watched the videos yet. So you're falling behind. You need to read those articles that have the article assignments. The in-class people have already done them. We spent time in class reading them. So you need to get yourself caught up. Okay. John Redmond is the leader of the IPP, which at this point is the largest party in Ireland. On this map, it's green. Okay. the largest party in Ireland, and the largest party in Ireland is allied with the Liberal Party in England. Okay. And so when the war breaks out, Redmond is sticking with his allies. The IPP has become the party of slow revolution, of cooperating with the English, of the party of old people. Okay. And a lot of Irish are going to be viewing the IPP as being out of touch. Well, as World War I proceeds, World War I is going to have this like radicalizing effect on Ireland because the young people are pretty pissed about having to go to this war that they didn't start, that they're defending a country that is oppressing them, that has nothing to do with them. They're like, we do not give a crap about Germany or France or England or any of these countries. I don't know why you're making us go to this terrible, terrible nightmare war, right? And the young don't want to go. The young at this point are in the party Sinn Féin. That's the party that they're forming, Sinn Féin. Okay. This is where we're going to get our rebellion, Easter Rising. Okay. Make this the next number, Easter Rising 1916. So Easter Rising of 1916. What happens here is this is a rebellion. This is a rebellion against the British in the middle of World War I. A rebellion against the British in the middle of World War I. Most Irish people will tap this as the first like step towards independence, right? I think that there's a better date later on. That's the first step towards independence, but a lot of Irish people will cite this one. Okay. Basically, what happens here is in 1916, think of our dates for World War I. When is World War I going to end? What are our dates for World War I, guys?
Isn't it like 1918 something?
Yeah, the very end of 1918. The fighting is actually going to bleed into 1919, right? But 1918 is kind of the official end of the war. So this is in the middle of the war. A group of Irish people, the young Republicans, the Irish Republican Brotherhood, they're going to arrange for a fight. Okay, and they have this plan that on Easter Sunday of 1916, they are going to rise up and that they are going to fight in the streets of every city of Ireland, and they're going to take it over. Now is the time to seize their country while the British are distracted. The British are fighting in France in this terrible, terrible war. The British will never be able to stop the Irish if they rise up. Here's the problem. The Irish are planning on having a shipload of weapons delivered from Germany in World War I. They're going to the English enemy and getting weapons. So they arrange for Germany to sell them a bunch of weapons, and Germany's totally on board, right? Germany's like, oh, hell yeah, I'll kick off a rebellion in Ireland. That way the British are weakened, right? That way I can beat the France, right? Germany's on board, 100% on board with this. The problem for the Irish is that the British found out about it. They intercepted the radio communications. They were already listening in on Germany. The English knew about it from day one. This arms shipment was never going to make it to Ireland. The British heard about it on the German side. They were tapping the lines, right? They intercepted the communications. And so when the British do that, they basically let these German ships leave port, go out into the ocean, and then come back. So they're coming up on the west coast of Ireland to deliver the weapons. And then the British arrest them right off the coast of Ireland so that all the Irish can see that the British know what's happening. So they arrest the Germans, they seize all the weapons, and the leadership gets kind of freaked out. The leadership gets freaked out, and then we get a conflict within the leadership of whether or not we should rebel or whether or not they should or shouldn't rebel. They eventually decide that they're going to rebel on on Easter Monday, the day after Easter, right? On Easter Monday instead. They change their plan and they still rebel. But at this point in time, the rebellion is only Dublin. There's a little bit of fighting in other cities, but mostly it's just Dublin. It's only in Dublin, and it's going to be a much smaller rebellion. Okay. But this is on Easter. They wanted to kind of preserve the branding of Easter Rising, right? I know that none of you guys are Christians. I don't think any of you guys are Christians, but Easter Rising, in Christian religion, Easter is the day that Jesus rises from the dead, right? So Easter Rising, right? They're keeping the name, right? They got to brand things. The Irish are really good at branding things. So they want to keep the branding. So it's Easter Monday instead. All right. So who's in charge of this? These are the organizations. These are the primary organizations: the Irish Republican Brotherhood, the Irish Brotherhood, and the Irish Citizen Army. All of these are very, very similar. These are all just groups of guys, of men, armed men in Ireland. Okay. The organization that stands out as unusual is this organization called Cumann na mBan. Cumann na mBan. Cumann na mBan is a women's organization. This is armed women in uniform with weapons fighting. Not nurses, not secretaries. These are soldiers, women soldiers. Okay. Now, our leadership is going to be two men. The first guy we've already met, James Connolly. James Connolly is our first leader, right? He's going to be our first leader. He's like almost a communist, right? He's the socialist leader, James Connolly. So he's one of the leaders of the movement. And then the overall big leader of the movement is a guy named Patrick Pearse. Okay. So James Connolly and Patrick Pearse are the two primary leaders of the movement. Okay. Two other very important leaders are going to be Constance Markievicz. Constance Markievicz, the woman right here, she's the leader of Cumann na mBan. Oops. She's the leader of Cumann na mBan, and she's going to actually have a pretty big influence about turning the rebels into soldiers, right? She's going to push for things like uniforms and things like standardized training and stuff like that. She's going to push for those things, which is why she's always in uniform. Now, you may recognize her name here. This is not an Irish name, is it? Right? This is not an Irish name. That's because it's her married name. She's married to a Polish guy. She's married to a Polish nobility, which is where she gets her nickname, the Countess, because she's, gained a noble title from Poland. I don't think she's actually a countess. That's just what they call her. But that's her nickname. She's called the Countess a lot. Anyway, and then the last guy that we're going to get, who is a really super important guy, he's going to become one of the most important people in all of Irish history, is Éamon de Valera. I'm going to come back to him, so we're going to leave him for just a moment, but we're going to come back to him. This is where he's going to rise up. When Easter Rising happens, the fighting lasts for about a week. And the British are going to respond. Really, really respond. The British bring in 16,000 troops. They bring in an entire shipload of troops who are on their way to France. They just divert the ship and it goes right into Ireland. 16,000 troops. And they reinvade Dublin. One of the problems with this battle is that as soon as the battle breaks out, the citizens of Dublin start to loot their way across the city. Like massive crime and looting starts breaking out. Dublin's one of the poorest cities in all of Europe at the time. And so Dublin, the people are so poor and so desperate that they're just looting everything, looking for food and stuff. This is the excuse that the British need in order to retake the city, right? That they have rebels and they have complete chaos in the city. And so the British set up artillery cannons and just start to fire into Dublin and just start to blow up all the buildings. If you look at these pictures, like look at this. This looks like World War II destruction, doesn't it? Right? Where you're just blowing up entire buildings. This is World War I, so it's artillery cannons being aimed in a city at buildings. Dublin is actually going to go on to become the most destroyed city in World War I, which is ironic because Ireland was not part of World War I, right? But it's actually going to become the most destroyed city in all of World War One, because most of the fighting in World War One is not happening in cities; it's happening in the countryside, right? And most of the cities are completely preserved. Paris never gets bombed. Amsterdam doesn't get bombed. Berlin doesn't get bombed. Rome doesn't get bombed. None of those cities get bombed. That's all World War II. Okay? You with me on this? Okay. The end result of the Easter Rising. The end result of Easter Rising is that all of the leadership, the British are going to have an overwhelming takeover of Ireland, and they're going to arrest all the leadership. Okay, the British are going to arrest all four of the people we outlined, right? So James Connolly, Patrick Pearse, Eamon de Valera, Constance Markovich, along with the other leaders that I'm not going to spend time on. They execute all of the leaders. Okay, and the British are going to put on a big show of it. On the very first day, they execute Patrick Pearse, and then every day for a week, they execute another leader, and then on the last day, they execute James Connolly. The British put a big show on it. They do not execute two. They do not execute Eamon de Valera or Constance Markovich. Okay? Markovich is spared because she's a woman. The British just say there's no reason to execute a woman. Women are just kind of crazy. Women aren't really in control of themselves. Women don't know what they're doing. They actually don't even want to arrest her, but she demands that the women all get arrested with the men. And she says, in Ireland, men and women are equal. And the women actually put themselves under arrest, and they surrender their weapons with the men and go into the prison cars. And at that point, the British are like, all right, ladies, we'll just arrest you, I guess. Right? So she is spared because of sexism. Eamon de Valera is spared because he's born in the United States. He's an American born, and he had moved to Ireland. And after Easter Rising, the Irish diaspora, especially in New York, lobbied the American government, and the American government approached England and said, whatever you do, do not execute an American, right? So he's spared because of his American birth. She's spared because of sexism, right? But Patrick Pearse is executed. James Connolly is executed. In fact, here's Eamon de Valera being arrested right here in kind of a badass picture, actually, right? He looks kind of cool, I think. All right. Let's do this aftermath, and then we're going to leave you alone. All right. So in the aftermath, the British had a gross overreaction. The Irish, who were on the fence, only about 50-50 of the Irish, about half of the Irish were on board with this rebellion, right? In fact, it might even be more like 2/3 of the Irish were opposed to it. But because the British overreact so badly, because they bombed Dublin so badly, because they invaded with so many troops, and because they executed all the leadership without a trial, the Irish turn on the British badly. The British are trying to get control over the Irish, and so what the British do is they pass something called the Military Services Act of 1918. They're trying to draft Ireland. Ireland was the only part of the empire that wasn't drafted, and the British say it's time to stop the special treatment for the Irish. We're going to draft you. Well, at this point in time, 1918, the war has been going on for years, right? And the Irish flip out. We call this the conscription crisis. And the conscription crisis is basically massive, massive protests across the entire country that lock up everything. And the conscription crisis lasts for the rest of 1918, okay? And as Ilha already reminded us, the war is over in November of 1918. The war actually ends before they can draft the Irish. As part of the negotiations, the British released Eamon de Valera from prison. They released Constance Markovich from prison. And when they did that, de Valera immediately joined Sinn Féin and started like leading the protests. Every time they released someone from prison, that person took their prison sentence as a badge of honor and joined Sinn Féin in the rebellion. This rebellion gets so bad that by the end of the war here, by the end of 1918, we get the first election of 1918 where the Irish decide that they are an independent country. They vote to leave the UK. They create their first parliament called the Dáil Éireann. You spell it right here, the Dáil Éireann. That's the name of the first Irish parliament, and they declare independence instantly. Everyone who survived Easter Rising essentially is elected, including Constance, including Markovich. She's arrested, but at this point she's in jail for protesting World War I, but she's still elected from jail. She becomes the first woman ever elected in Irish history, and she's in jail when she's elected. She actually gets released after her election. The Irish break her out of prison, and she becomes the first woman to be elected in Irish history. Okay, we're going to leave it here because, as you guys can probably predict, the British are deeply opposed to this. We are going to enter into the Irish War of Independence here in just a moment. Okay, but we're going to leave this here. I'm going to introduce you to these other men, Michael Collins, Arthur Griffith, and W.T. Cosgrove, next time on the next class period. All right. You guys do have a quiz. I would like you to log in and take the quiz today, please. It's IREQ2. The code is ridiculous. The code is ridiculous. Okay. Please log in tonight and take the quiz. I would like to have them all graded tomorrow morning. So, cool. Do you guys have questions?
Yeah, I had a question.
Yeah, Mike.
So with the Military Services Act, it started the conscription crisis. What kind of things did they do to like resist the draft in Ireland?
Yeah, so we get massive groups of people who basically like will go to the police station, and you'll have like a group of people blocking the door so that the police cars can't drive out. Or when a police car drives into a neighborhood, the police car will find itself surrounded by 30 or 40 people so that the police can't drive anywhere without running over people, right? They're also going to shut down all the factories, especially the war factories. They're going to shut down the ports. Everywhere that a British official goes, he's going to be met with crowds of people that are basically blocking the official so he can't get where he needs to go. But it's peaceful. It's not, they aren't blowing things up in the conscription crisis. It's pretty peaceful. Yeah, but it's a lot like a satyagraha. It's a lot like that. Yeah. Do you guys have any other questions? Are we good to go? All right. You are free to go unless you have something for me. All right. 3, 2, 1.